There's a silent, sharp, irreversible moment in life. The moment a person gives up hope that the world will truly understand them. No drama, no audience, no applause, only silence. Realizing no one fixes everything. No one thinks of your pain. A heavy silence sinks deep. Inside that silence, something ancient wakes up. A strength that doesn't beg, doesn't explain, and doesn't need to be seen. This is when you stop performing for others, truly being yourself. The world might be indifferent, but you don't have to be powerless. The Stoics understood this. They believed power begins when expectations die. In this death, your real life truly begins. Ready to stop chasing external validation? Build inner strength? See this video as a silent promise, a step towards discipline, clarity, and self-respect. Because we are not chasing the world's applause. We are building something the world cannot ignore. Most people live with a silent fantasy that their pain is visible from the outside. Deep down, we think, if I suffer enough, someone will step in. If I explain it with the right words, someone will understand me. This is a soft hope built deep into how we are raised, usually unspoken. If I am hurting, the world will care. But then life shows its real face. Your pain is ignored. Your tears go unnoticed. That phone never rings. And that is when something shifts inside. You begin to see this illusion for what it is. People's indifference to your pain is not a reflection of you being worthless. It is just a reflection of how consumed people are by their own chaos. Everyone is fighting a battle you will never fully see, just like they will never fully see yours. If you build your identity on being seen, you will spend your life feeling invisible. You know that silent ache of being ignored? That is not cruelty. That is the truth itself. And if you look closely, it teaches something. When we are young, we believe pain must have a reward. If we suffer, we think someone owes us comfort. But the truth is, life does not give out medals for endurance. Angels don't fall from the sky when you fall to your knees. Life just goes on. People go on with their lives. Friends forget. Strangers scroll past, not out of malice, but their own problems. This might sound harsh, but just because it is harsh doesn't mean it isn't true. And here is the strange part. This painful realization is the first step to becoming free. When you stop waiting for the world to react to your pain, you stop waiting altogether. You stop freezing your life, hoping someone will notice you are stuck. You start moving for completely different reasons, not applause. Carl Jung once said, "The world will ask you who you are, and if you do not know, the world will tell you." But what Jung didn't say, what you learn through experience, is this. Most people don't ask because they care. They ask so they can put you in a box that fits their minds, one they can make sense of. They don't see you. They only see the idea of you in their heads. And when you stop performing for those looks, you finally start living for something real. There is a strange sadness in realizing you are not the main character in anyone's story, but only the main character in your own. This is not a rejection. It is simply the law of gravity. No one owes you understanding. No one has to hold your hand through that fog. Even though this makes the world feel like a colder place, it also makes your inner world shine brighter, because now you are the one lighting that fire. No more waiting for someone to read between the lines of your silence. No more hoping your quiet breakdown will be noticed and gently fixed. Now you understand the situation, and this changes everything. That disappointment that used to hurt you turns into clarity, and clarity is the first real freedom. This is exactly where the Stoics found their power, not in being completely unaffected by pain, but in refusing to outsource their healing to others. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself every day, do not waste the rest of your life guessing what your neighbors think. In other words, stop hoping someone else will see your wounds and give you value. The more you focus on being seen, the less you see yourself. And ironically, the more invisible you become. Instead of being the signal in your own life, you become a noise in someone else's life. But when you finally let go of the hope that others will witness your pain and give it weight, you start building something unbreakable. Not because you became heartless, but because your mind became clear. You start to realize how much of your identity was shaped around being seen. The belief that someone, somewhere, should care about your situation. And when they didn't, you always took it personally. But the truth no one wants to admit is this. People not caring does not mean you are worthless. It just means they are human, flawed, overwhelmed, and distracted just like you. The game was never about being seen. The game was always about waking up to the fact that the one watching you is actually you. You are the one living inside your own mind all this time. You are the only witness to the full weight of your thoughts. This is not a curse. This is a gift, because this means the person who has the power to change your story is not them. It is you. There is great power in being invisible. There is great clarity in walking without needing an audience. Epictetus says, "Don't explain your philosophy, live it." This is exactly what happens when you let go of the hope of being seen. You start turning into someone, not to get attention or recognition, but because something inside you refuses to stay small anymore. The pain that once felt unbearable becomes your blueprint. The silence that once haunted you becomes your teacher. The solitude that once scared you becomes your home. And when this change happens, you no longer feel the need to broadcast your wounds. You just carry them differently. Not as a burden, but as proof that you kept going. Maybe being ignored wasn't a tragedy like you thought. Maybe it was a beginning, the slow and quiet death of illusions, and the birth of something real, solid, that doesn't look for validation. You don't need to be seen to turn into something great. You just need to see yourself clearly, honestly, and without decoration. This is where everything changes. When no one listens to you, something unexpected happens. You start listening to yourself, not that superficial voice that echoes other people's expectations, but the deeper, quieter one. That real voice of yours, that you have always ignored until today because it was too weak to compete with the noise of the world. In the absence of applause, silence takes root. You start hearing your own thoughts, not as background noise, but as a guide. It feels strange at first, even uncomfortable. You are used to looking for your own reflection in other people's eyes. But when those eyes turn away, you learn to see yourself from the inside. And in that moment, something clicks into place. You start moving differently. Not because someone told you to, not because someone believed in you, but because you decided to show up without witnesses, cheerleaders, or someone holding the door open for you. What we call self-confidence is not an explosion that comes all at once. It comes slowly and usually disguised as loneliness. You wake up one day and realize no one is checking on you. No one is asking how you are. And instead of falling apart, you start building. You start taking yourself seriously. Not because others do, but because you are tired of waiting. How many times did you stop your growth hoping someone would give you permission to continue? You waited for them to tell you it's the right time, the right direction. But what if that permission never comes? What if no one ever says you are ready? Are you going to stay frozen forever? Or will you finally take the authority that belonged to you all along? Real power is not in being chosen, but in choosing yourself. The world teaches us to look for external validation as if it's oxygen. But the Stoics knew that peace is found in discipline, not popularity. Epictetus says, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Freedom doesn't come from being supported. It comes from knowing you will continue even when you are not supported. It is being sure you will do the work, even when the room is completely empty. Not out of bitterness or anger, but because the work matters. Because you matter. When you understand this, showing up stops being a performance. It turns into an act of self. And in that silence, a new relationship is built. Not with the world, but with your own mind. You start trusting it more. You ask what it needs. You listen to the tiredness in your body, the pull inside you, the fire in your chest. You stop asking others to approve your intuition. You build trust. You start keeping the promises you make to yourself. You go for that walk. You write those words. You say no to something that drains your energy. These are not loud actions, but they build something no one on the outside can see. Trust. And the trust you have in yourself is the only valid currency of freedom. When you understand that you have your own plan B now, a quiet power develops. When silence doesn't scare you, when you don't feel the need to announce your every move or explain your every feeling, when you don't beg for someone to notice you are trying. Because you know the effort you are putting in. You know the storms you walked through, and only you know what it cost you to choose to grow instead of breaking down and still be here. This is not arrogance. This is honesty. You are no longer performing for the world. You are becoming for yourself. Of course, there will be moments of doubt. There will be moments when you wish someone would say, "I see you. I'm here." But you are no longer dependent on it. You no longer fall apart in the absence of those words. You carry yourself with a quiet awareness of having earned your own respect. And this is a very rare thing. This is what makes people pause when you walk into a room. Not because you demanded attention, but because your energy says, "I don't need it." Seneca writes, "The greatest empire is to be emperor of oneself." And ruling yourself doesn't look like perfection. It looks like being consistent even in the face of invisibility. It looks like doing what is important even when no one is applauding. When you build life from that point, you are no longer dependent on an outside structure. You become the structure itself. You don't break down when someone pulls away from you. You don't unravel when someone misunderstands you. Because your foundation was never built on them understanding you in the first place. Your foundation was built on clarity, on those quiet decisions made in solitude. And the most crucial part is this. When you start trusting yourself this way, you also stop being angry at others for not being the person you needed. You release them. You stop waiting for them to come back, to notice, to explain. You don't tie your own progress to their presence. You move forward with grace, not coldness, whether they are there or not. You become free. Not because the pain is gone, but because it no longer defines your path. You carry that pain, but you don't let it carry you. We live in a world where being exposed is rewarded. Every feeling must be shared, every wound displayed, every moment of struggle turned into content for others to comment on. The more visibly broken you are, the more attention you get. But not all attention is healing. Some of it is empty. Some of it makes you addicted to constantly looking wounded just to connect. And slowly, without realizing it, you start performing your own pain. You package and edit your pain to fit others' sympathy. You turn real emotions into content, thinking it will bring you closer to other people. But it doesn't. It just makes your healing process public property. What was once sacred is opened for consumption. There's a difference between honesty and emotional performance. One comes from depth, the other from habit. One is quiet, the other is memorized. And most of us were never taught this difference. We confuse expressing with healing. We think that when we talk about it, we have solved it. But sometimes, the more you talk about a wound, the more you keep it alive. Not everything needs to be told. Some things need to be felt, endured, and integrated in silence. When you are alone with your thoughts, when you choose not to prove yourself, not to explain the deep transformations that usually happen when no one is watching. When you let your emotions pass through without needing them to be validated, liked, or seen. This is not suppression. This is sovereignty. It is easy to confuse what is loud with what is strong. But strength is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet, steady, and completely uninterested in being understood. You don't have to broadcast your healing process in real time. You can keep it to yourself, and that patience that refuses to perform gives you your real power. When you stop constantly broadcasting your wounds, you also stop attracting the people who are only there to watch that damage. And slowly, you start attracting people who respect what you have built in silence. The moment you understand that your emotions are not a currency for attention, you stop spending them so carelessly. You start protecting your inner world like a rare jewel Bacausides. You realize how much energy was spent explaining things that didn't need explaining. How much power you lost, trying to explain yourself to people who didn't even have the depth to understand themselves. You watch crowds applaud vulnerability, but no one says that real vulnerability is not exposing everything. Real vulnerability is the ability to discern. Vulnerability is knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. You can hold your pain quietly. You can heal without showing off. You can mourn without an audience. And when you do this, something amazing happens. You stop fearing the silence. You start feeling at home inside it. Because now it doesn't feel like abandonment. It feels like a return to yourself. A return to what is real. Being rejected is sometimes just being redirected. You weren't ignored because you were worthless. You were pushed aside because your depth couldn't be digested by shallow eyes. Your silence was mistaken for absence. Your self-restraint for coldness. You were misunderstood, not because you couldn't express yourself, but because you carry a depth that most people's frequencies aren't tuned to. This doesn't make you wrong. This makes you rare. The world usually doesn't recognize nuances. It praises things, as Sally labeled, consumed and predictable. When you don't fit into these neat boxes, you become inconvenient. In a world rushing to categorize, inconvenient things are thrown away. It's easy to internalize this as a flaw. If I were louder, smiled more, softened my edges, maybe they would accept me. This is a trap. The belief that your value depends on being readable by others is a huge trap. You were not created to shrink. There comes a point where you stop interpreting rejection as a loss and start seeing it as clarity. Every person who ignores you, every environment that doesn't welcome you, every silence that follows your presence. All of these tell you something, not about your worth, but about where your energy does not belong. This insight is priceless. It saves you from years of self-doubt. It teaches you to invest where you are valued. And when you learn this, you stop wondering why you weren't chosen. You realize that not being chosen was a blessing, because that rejection gave you back to yourself. Loneliness, that place where no one is left. This is terrifying for most, because when there is no one left to impress, no one left to chase, there is only one thing left. The truth itself, no performance, no edits, just you. Even though this feels like a loss at first, it is the beginning of complete freedom. It sharpens the boundaries of your silence. You stop saying yes just to not disappoint someone. You stop engaging in conversations that suck your soul. You learn that saying no is not rude. It is honesty. When you return to the world from loneliness, you come back different. Not distant, but determined. Not ruthless, but with clear boundaries. You don't speak to be heard. You speak because your words come from silence, not from noise. You're not easily shaken because you know the ground you stand on. You built it with a quiet moment every single time. In every person's life, there comes that quiet turning point, where that version of you that once felt vital starts to fall apart. Not with a dramatic crash, but with a slow erosion. That old you, the one who needed approval, who bent double to fit into small spaces, who rehearsed words to be liked. It starts to get heavy, outdated, fake. You try to carry it a little longer out of habit, fear, maybe guilt, but it drags, it stiffens, and eventually starts to rot. This is not a failure. This is an evolution. When something dies inside you, it doesn't always mean a loss. Sometimes it is the first breath of a deeper, more honest existence. First, you lose your direction. You don't feel exactly like yourself anymore, but you can't go back either. The old mask doesn't fit your face anymore. You speak less and less. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you no longer feel the need to be understood by everyone. You don't hesitate to fill the room with silence. You don't use your personality as a performance tool to make people comfortable. You just wait like a mountain, silent, watchful, unshakable. It is very interesting how people react when you go through this change. So may step away some question, what changed? They will tell you that you seem colder, more distant, less fun. What they are actually feeling is this. You have finally stopped doing that emotional heavy lifting that you never consented to in the first place. You pulled out of the game of being overly tolerable. You are no longer addicted to being liked, and this absence of yours makes people uncomfortable because they can't predict you anymore. An unpredictability in someone who once submitted feels threatening to those still holding on to those old versions of you. Remember Marcus Aurelius's magnificent words. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. The disappearance of your old self is exactly this. It feels like a loss, but it actually opens a brand new path. A path where you no longer chase people to connect, but draw them in by staying in your own center. You don't look for mirrors in others anymore. You found your own reflection, and that is enough for you. You're not drawn into the same conversations. You don't feel the obligation to be constantly available. And this feels like loneliness at first, but then it turns into something completely different. Freedom. Because you realize you were never really tied to those people, those places, or those roles. You were only tied to the person you had to become to stay there. And now, that person is gone. A real sense of presence is not about how much you talk or how loud you say it. It is about how little you need. There is immense power in the silence, a weight in the stance of someone who has stopped seeking approval. When they enter that room, they don't try to control the space. They're just there. They don't need to announce their presence, because their energy does it for them. They don't try hard to be noticed, but everyone's eyes are on them. This is not arrogance. This is not a performance. This is the solid self-confidence of someone who no longer waits for permission to exist. In a world obsessed with showing off, this kind of restraint is rare, and because it is rare, it is attractive. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. When you stop trying to be impressive, you become unforgettable. Not because you shouted, but because your silence had a depth. Because where you stood had a direction. You weren't trying to win the room. You were rooted somewhere much deeper than a performance. People feel this. They always do. Because in a culture that rewards the loud, those who stay steady become mysterious. Those who don't feel the need to prove themselves look like they have already proven something much more important. Self-mastery. This power you created in your silence does not survive on the attention or care of others. You gain your real power when you stop waiting to be rescued from pain, loneliness, or being misunderstood. When you stop caring that no one is taking care of you. Do not see this change as a loss. This is a return. It is claiming yourself back. You took back the most important ability you faced, the ability to direct yourself, to walk through disappointment without breaking down, to be invisible without getting lost, to be misunderstood without abandoning yourself. You don't need to be visible to be strong. You don't need to be understood to feel whole. The moment you stop waiting for the world to care about you is the moment you start shaping the world around you into something it cannot ignore, silently, completely, and unapologetically. Thank you for walking this path with me today. If this philosophy touched you, my other video's on the screen right now. Watch that to keep building. Keep becoming